for generations engulfed by bitter civil war. Once the pearl of the Middle East, now the violent vortex of regional conflict. In the 1970s, into the Lebanese countryside came the Palestinian army, determined to destroy Israel. From Lebanon, the PLO waged a campaign of terror and destruction against Israel. Israel, in turn, launched counterstrikes, further tearing at the fragile fabric of Lebanon. In 1982, Israel decided to finish the PLO once and for all. This is the story of Israel's invasion of Lebanon, of an attempt to obliterate a dangerous enemy, of the bloody conquest of Beirut, of the innocent civilians caught tragically in the middle, and of the horrible price paid when Israel changed from David to Goliath. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story. Israel versus the PLO, the invasion of Lebanon. From ABC News, great TV news stories with Peter Jennings, Sam Donaldson, Barbara Walters, Geraldo Rivera, Frank Reynolds, Richard Threlkeld, Pierre Salinger, John Scally, and the worldwide resources of ABC News.
ABC News has learned that Israeli armed forces have completed preparations for a military attack into Lebanon, and U.S. officials believe will strike within a few days, probably this weekend. High administration officials have been alerted that Prime Minister Begin is on the brink of giving his forces a go-ahead, using as an explanation the assassination of an Israeli diplomat in Paris last Saturday. However, it's suspected at the highest level here that an Israeli decision to attack is time to take advantage of the U.S. preoccupation with the Falkland Islands crisis. At least 2 Israeli divisions have been spotted by U.S. satellite and other intelligence poised for an attack along the Lebanese border. Their position could foreshadow either the long-feared massive attack or a smaller invasion which would aim only at PLO installations in southern Lebanon. If the larger attack develops, some U.S. officials believe Israeli troops would seek to advance all the way to Beirut's outskirts while simultaneously attacking Syrian missiles positioned in the Bekaa Valley.
Good evening. The stillness of the ceasefire in southern Lebanon was shattered today by the sound of guns, bombs, and planes. Peter Jennings is at our foreign desk in London. Peter?
Frank, this afternoon the Israeli Air Force attacked a variety of targets in Lebanon. It wasn't the massive raid which much of the world has been expecting and which the United States has been trying to prevent. It was, however, an attack with major political implications. In the first of 2 reports, here is ABC Jacques Grenier in Beirut.
The Israeli jets flew over Lebanon for about 2 hours, concentrating their attacks on 4 Palestinian positions. The Palestinians responded with anti-aircraft guns and heat-seeking surface-to-air missiles. But the planes were too high for the guns and dropped decoy flares to attract the missiles. Lebanese radio said the Israeli bombs and rockets killed at least 25 people. Many more were wounded. Ambulances carried the casualties to Beirut, about 10 miles from the most intensive bombing. The rockets and bombs fell, for the most part, on Palestinian military positions. Reporters were kept away. The raids put to rest the American-negotiated ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians, which has held tenuously for the past 9 months. Palestinian spokesman tonight made that very clear.
Everybody around the world knows that this is a clear provocation and it's a violation and a breaching to the ceasefire which was agreed upon.
For several weeks now, Palestinian leaders have been predicting that Israel will invade southern Lebanon. Any retaliation by the Palestinians for today's air raids could provoke that very invasion. Jacques Grenier, ABC News, Beirut.
It's been a long time now that people on both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian divide have been waiting for an incident, something that would generate open conflict again between Israel and the Palestinians in Lebanon. That incident, the Israelis blame it on the PLO denied it, was a terrorist attack on Israel's ambassador in Britain last night. Within 24 hours, Israel and the Palestinians were attacking each other across the Israeli-Lebanese border. First, from Beirut, Here's ABC's Chris Harper.
The Israeli attack was centered on Palestinian positions in Beirut, leaving over 30 people dead and scores injured. One key target was a sports arena, where Israel claimed the PLO was storing its weapons. Eyewitnesses say at least 10 waves of Israeli jets pounded refugee camps and the area near the main headquarters of the PLO. It was the third and most damaging raid in the past 6 weeks, while Israel said the hour-long raid was in retaliation for the shooting of its ambassador to Britain. The PLO denied that its people were involved in that attack. The PLO responded with anti-aircraft fire as the jets swooped down on Beirut and later sent Katyusha rockets pouring on Israeli settlements along the border. Ambulances screamed throughout Beirut, carrying dead and wounded to nearby hospitals. The PLO puts the casualties at 35 dead, but the toll is expected to rise as victims are found in the rubble. The PLO poured smoke bombs throughout the city to camouflage targets after the initial assault, and Palestinian gunmen seem prepared for another round, despite the 10-month-old truce here in Lebanon.
Today's attack shatters the truce between Israel and the Palestinians. When U.S. envoy Philip Habib arrives here next week, he will have to try to put together whatever pieces remain of that ceasefire. Chris Harper, ABC News, Beirut.
This is Bill Siemens in Israel. Almost immediately after the Israeli airstrike, Palestinian rockets and artillery shells fired from Lebanon into northern Israel damaged buildings, killed one Israeli, and wounded at least 4 others. It was the PLO answer to the Israeli air raid. As loudspeaker cars and troops urged residents to go down into their bomb shelters, Israeli artillery fired back, and tonight there seemed to be little hope for the ceasefire as the level of violence rises. The Israelis have repeatedly warned that they will not tolerate attacks like this at home, and they claim that they are now facing a new wave of terrorism against their diplomats abroad. The critical question tonight is whether the Israelis will now launch a ground attack against the PLO in Lebanon, less than 3 weeks before Prime Minister Begin is scheduled to meet President Reagan in Washington. Bill Siemens, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
Good evening from Versailles, the ornate palace outside Paris, where the end of the 7-Nation Economic Summit today was completely overshadowed by an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Israeli tanks and troops, backed by air and sea bombardment, crossed into Lebanon before dawn. The aim to destroy Palestinian guerrilla bases. And although hope was being expressed everywhere that there be no contact between the Israeli force and the Syrian force stationed in Lebanon, there is a report from Beirut tonight from the Syrian command that there has been a contact between Israeli and Syrian soldiers. We have 2 reports on the early fighting, beginning with Chris Harper in Beirut.
Warplanes pounded Palestinian targets in Lebanon again today as Israel launched a full-scale invasion against the PLO. The Palestinians say they downed 3 Israeli jets and 1 helicopter in the fighting and put more than 12 tanks out of commission. Early this morning, over 300 Israeli tanks and personnel carriers poured through UN peacekeeping forces, launching a 3-pronged attack on PLO strongholds in Tyre, Nabatea, and Shabaa. The aim of the invasion was to push the PLO farther north to stop missile attacks into Israel. In Sidon, the Palestinians celebrated the death of 1 Israeli pilot shot down during the massive airstrikes. The body was shown to angry mobs in the city. The PLO claims that 3 other pilots were killed and 1 captured in the fighting, the fiercest since Israel launched a similar invasion 4 years ago. The airstrikes continued for the 3rd day in a row as casualties mounted on both sides. Over 300 people have died so far here, and there are fears that the toll will be even higher as the Israelis push north. But the PLO holds strong positions in southern Lebanon, and many observers here think that Israel will suffer heavy losses, even if they are successful in their objectives. Chris Harper, ABC News, Beirut.
This is Bill Siemens in Israel. Long columns of Israeli tanks and armored personnel carriers loaded with infantry rolled over the border into southern Lebanon this morning. The Israeli military spokesman said that they would seek out and destroy all the Palestinian terrorist concentrations and artillery positions that have sent a rain of rockets and shells into Israeli border communities in the past few days. The shooting of the Israeli ambassador in London and the recent Palestinian shelling of northern Israel were the last straw.